Getting your project set up to a repository should not be a difficult process. In this video, I'll be showing just how simple it can be to get your Unreal project hooked up and stored to a Git repository. There are plenty of other options, but I'll be showing what I find to be one of the easiest and most flexible options just to get started. You can look into things like Perforce and other providers as your projects may be growing. The first thing you need to do is go to github.com. This is where we're going to be creating our account if you don't already have one. And of course, if you do have a GitHub account, just choose the sign in option at the top here. This is where we're going to be creating and storing our online repository. Again, you will find other providers. Creating an account here, though, is going to be super useful if you ever wanted to do anything like pulling the engine source code for the Unreal Engine or getting some of the source code to demonstration Unreal projects. You will need one of these accounts anyway, so having this now is going to be super useful. So this will be the first step. Just to note as well, as always in all of my videos, any of the URLs that I mention in the video will be in the description down below. I'll put those in order so you can follow through as we go along. When you have either signed in or signed up, we can follow this process here. You'll have a screen that should look something like this. If you haven't created any repositories in the past, you'll have this option to the left-hand side to create a new repository. And you can see here as well, I've had other people following me with the past repositories that I've created or shared for this account through the YouTube channel. So yours may look a little bit different here. You probably have a completely empty screen in the activity section. So we'll be leaving this stage for a little while. We will be returning to this webpage a little bit later, so do keep that open. Next, heading on over to Google, I just wanted to show that there are different options that you have at this stage. So I'm going to be using the Git Desktop just because I find that it's the kind of most lightweight and easy to navigate, just for simple projects at least. But this is another thing where you will have plenty of different options. You don't have to follow and use the official GitHub applications just because you're using a Git repository. So we can see here on Google, I've searched for the Git application, which is what we'll be using on our desktop to manage and access our repositories. Now we can see if we scroll down, we've got a few different options. Some of the bigger ones would be things like SourceTree. Now officially, SourceTree pairs better with Bitbucket, which is the alternative to github.com that we've just looked at. Again, they're both technically Git repositories and work in a very similar way, but I think the flexibility and ease of use with GitHub just has the added benefit here. We also have things like GitKraken, which is another option. It does have some free components to it, but generally it's more of a paid application. So you can look through all of these if you wanted to. But like I've mentioned, I'll be using the desktop version for GitHub. So this can just be found at desktop.github.com. And in here, quite simply, all you need to do is come in, press the download for Windows. This is going to be a very small.exe, install that, a very standard process. I won't go through those steps with you. And then once you have that, you're pretty much ready to get your first repository connected from your browser to your desktop application. One other thing to mention here as well, that some of the differences between things like SourceTree, Bitbucket, and Git and Git Desktop used to be that one of the benefits of using something like SourceTree and Bitbucket were that they were completely free, even for private repositories, which GitHub didn't used to provide. That's now changed. GitHub is completely free, which is why I've kind of moved my recommendation because of the flexibility, ease of use, general kind of scope and size of projects that it can manage. And its free nature make it very, very convenient to get your first project set up using this. Something else which is completely free and easy to get started with is provided by the sponsors of this video, Core. Core is a new free game creation platform which allows you to build, publish, and play games all through one environment. This is a really great way to get into making games. It doesn't require any coding, although it does have the option if you wanted to dive deeper into the projects, you do get the option of the coding language Lua, which can be a very nice initial language to be learning. And very much like Unreal, you also have starter projects, and you can even build upon other things shared by the community and other creators. One of the things I really like about Core is all of the projects come with thousands of free, high-quality music, sound, and art assets. Most of the projects that I've seen so far are fully integrated to be multiplayer ready, so it makes things like publishing and working with multiplayer games very, very simple too. And in addition to this, Core has also announced a 50% revenue share with the game creators. So if you're familiar with things like Roblox, this is 2 times what Roblox is currently offering for revenue share and 10 times that of the Fortnite creatives' current revenue. Many creators on Core are even using their revenue share to pay bills, buy dream cars, and quit their day jobs. Now, all of this is actually leveraged using the Unreal Engine, so it's another nice way to get this in the ecosystem. You can download this on the Epic launcher and get the full package that way. Now, this is a platform I've genuinely had installed for a while. I've really wanted to start looking into this, even before I've been contacted by Core. I really like the idea of the designer-friendly interface, the way that you can very easily get your ideas working in this platform. Things look pretty good from the get-go because of all of the assets provided. And even though I'm a programmer by trade, sometimes you have those ideas where you don't want to spend a week or two just getting the very kind of bare-bones fundamentals of a project set up and going. And this is where I really think that Core is going to be a great platform for programmers, artists, and designers alike to get those ideas and concepts from paper straight into a working kind of vertical slice or something. So if you're interested, use the link in the description to download Core. At the time of recording, Core is also hosting a game jam named Traffic Jam. This is a competition where you'll develop a new vehicle-based game with the game creation platform Core. The platform's going to make building all of this very, very simple. You have a roster of physics-based vehicles, including Formula 1 racers, go-karts, and even tanks ready to use. And you can compete for part of a $25,000 cash prize pool just by entering your game into one of the 4 available categories. And use the link in the description to learn more about the event. Okay, so hopefully in the background there, you have all of this now downloaded and installed. You should have an application looking something like this. If this is your first time, you probably have a pretty much empty front screen here as well. The first thing that we want to do though is go to File and Options. Now, if you haven't already, you'll need to sign in here. This is going to be the same email and password that you've either just created or signed in to the github.com webpage. Before doing that, I'm just going to very quickly come down here. One thing I'll change, which some of you may want to do as well, so to avoid those conversations, I'm going to go down to Appearance, and I'm just going to change this to the dark theme. So for the rest of this is how this is going to look on my system. That's the only change that we'll be making here, so now go ahead and sign in. With that step complete, we can see here that I'm signed in through the dev-enabled account that I've just shown, and I still don't have any repositories at the moment. So the reason we don't have that created yet is I wanted to show you 2 different approaches to get repositories set up and created. Generally, I only see one of them shown, and I think that knowing how to do it from the desktop application as well as creating it from the web page first, they're the 2 different options. I think it's going to be useful to know how to navigate both scenarios. If we navigate back on over to our web browser once more, we're going to want to navigate to git-lfs.github.com. Again, links provided below. We're going to download and use this to help us manage the larger file sizes when working with GitHub. So again, completely free, but this is going to help us either track or ignore certain files which otherwise would really bloat the repository size. So this is going to make a lot more sense when we have the repositories ready to work with. All you need to do for now is follow these very simple steps. In fact, all we really need to do is download using this download button here, install that, kind of forget about it for a moment until we get to creating our repositories. But we only have a few simple steps you can see here to follow to get this installed and working. When you have that downloaded and installed or in the background, the next thing we need to do to get the groundwork kind of laid out for having something to push to that repository is to create or have another Unreal project. I'd recommend, whilst testing, especially if this is your first time, perhaps going with an empty project, I would create a new blank project with no starter content, so not using a template, just so that it's a very lightweight, simple project to get into the repository. I've gone ahead and done this, so we can see here this is just an empty project named yt_git. It has no content, but we have a full project ready to go that we can put into our repository. Again, not having the starter content, no template stuff, just means that if you have a slower internet, then this test process at least won't take as much time or bandwidth. Also, just to note, this doesn't really matter, but I've placed mine on the desktop, just somewhere I tend to put my projects if I know I'm not going to be keeping them. Anything which is just going to be nice and easy to get to and will later be removed, I've put this just here. Moving back over to github.com. Now, this is going to be the first of the 2 ways that I'll show you how to create and push your initial repository. This is the way that I see covered most often, and this is also, I think, the way which can be, especially for new people, the most confusing way. This is where we're going to create our repository online. We're then going to have to pull that to our application and work out a way to get our project into that new folder. Even in my mind, it feels a little bit kind of counterintuitive, and I'll show you the easier way afterwards. But because you will see this quite often, and sometimes you'll have someone give you a repository from a browser first, it will be useful to know how to do it this way. So what we want to do is on the main page here, we're going to create a new repository. We will want to give the repository a name. I'm just going to call this the same thing as the project itself. So, and there's a reason for this. So I'd recommend you do the same thing. So whatever the name of your project was and the main folder that you have hopefully on your desktop. So just to show you, mine is yt_git. For that reason, I'll name this one yt_git as well. We can give this a description if we wanted to, not really required. Like I've mentioned, we can make this private as well as public. So I'll take this to be a private repository at no extra cost to that one. You can add a README and a license if you wanted to. These two are not too important for a lot of projects. The really important thing we want to do here though is add a .gitignore. So we're going to add this. We can choose a template here, and we have a lot of different templates. These are based on the different languages, engines, or platforms you might be using. You can see you've got some general kind of C++ or C language templates. If we scroll all the way down, we can find that we're going to have an Unreal Engine gitignore. So what this will do, we're going to look at the file that it produces a little bit later, but in our main repository, the folder that's going to be pulled to our desktop, it's going to give us a kind of text file essentially with a list of things that we want this repository not to include. These are going to be things which will be automatically generated and kind of fleshed out as you use the project. It will also be things like garbage save files, things which are going to be useful to speed up the loading of the project, but you don't need them to be shared or in the repository. So that's what that will be doing. And with that done, we're going to hit the create repository. That will automatically take you to this web page. We have the gitignore file. So this is now actually our repository. At the moment, it doesn't really have anything in apart from that gitignore file. We can see here we have a few different options. What we want to do is get our code. Now, the very easy way is just to download this as a zip, but we want to really get used to using our desktop application and running everything through our Git desktop. What we can do here is either let it open the GitHub desktop for us, or we can just copy the link here, the HTTPS. That will copy the link that we need, and then we can navigate back to the GitHub desktop application. With this loaded, we want to clone a repository from the internet. So remember, this is the internet-based approach. So we're going to select this option. We want the URL that we've just pasted in. So we could, if we wanted, try and refresh the repositories that we have on our account. In this case, it has found it. But another way, if you don't already have it on the account, again, it's going to be useful to know how to use the URL. So I'm going to paste in that HTTPS URL here, and we want this to be placed. Let's say that we're going to place this on the desktop. Now, the important thing here, I've put this on the desktop path. I've created a new folder named temp. Again, I'd recommend doing this. So we're going to place this into another folder. Again, this will all make sense when we've gone through and taken these initial steps. The main thing is we cannot have it conflicting with the actual project name that we have on the desktop. So I'll choose to clone this here. And now the quickest way to get to this is we can show this in the Explorer. And we can see that on our desktop temp folder, we have our project yt_git. So we now want to fill this. And the other thing is in the application, we now have a change in view here. We have the changes. So this will be the list of files or code files, project files like assets and things will all show here, and some information about the commits that we'll be making. So what we want to do is we're going to close everything and go back to the desktop. We now want to get this project into our repository. So this is where the important thing comes in. There's a very specific way that we need the structure of the files in our repository folder. So if we take a look in the temp folder to begin with, and then inside of the yt_git, we're going to see a few things here. So we have a Git folder and a Git ignore. So if we take a quick look at what this Git ignore is doing, I'm going to open this with something. You can use Notepad or something. I'm going to go with VS Code just because it formats things a little bit more nicely. And what we can see is this is going to ignore everything within this folder structure, which is of type .obj, so the different kind of 3D models. And the important things, the really important things to ignore are these saved folders, intermediate folders, plugins, and these are the things, especially these two, they really take up a lot of space. If you delete them when you restart the project, they just get rebuilt anyway. So it's not something which is integral to the project running, and they can become like gigabytes worth of data. So you don't want to be storing those in the project, which is why we have this ignore file to work with. And you can see that if we just want to ignore specific things, we have an asterisk and like ignore.exes, or we can ignore folders. So everything within the build folder. So that's how we can use these. Then, like I mentioned, the next important thing is that we need to make sure that our root directory of our project is in the same location as this Git folder. So what this means is if we go into the yt_git project, what we want to do is, because we have the yt_git folder here, we want all of this information, so our actual project information. We're going to cut this and paste this to be in line with our Git folder. Now, this isn't going to work because I have the project open, so I'm just going to close this and we will try this again. And with that working, we can pull across the intermediate folder. We can replace that. Again, we don't need that, but I kind of want to show that if you've done this correctly, then the intermediate and the saved folder shouldn't be appearing anyway. So we can have this still in the project folder, but we won't see this appear because of the git ignore. So all of these have now been tracked. We've got the plus icon just here. Back inside of the Git application, we can kind of compare against what we're seeing. And this is exactly what we want to see. So again, if you're seeing the same thing, you know you have everything in the right directory. The important thing is just having all of those project files inside of the name of the folder. So we're basically taking out of the original one, putting it inside of a temporary folder or another folder so that we can replace it here. Of course, the problem being is if you tried using the application and cloning this to the same location, you're going to have a naming conflict, which is why we've added the temp folder, and Git unfortunately won't allow you to have the same files. It won't try and override it or anything, so it won't let you pull something to the same folder name. So what we're going to do is we're going to use this option where we transfer things over, and then we just want to check that we're only seeing, so we've got the U project, which is this file here, and the editor specific things. So the things like the configs that we'll be setting for our specific project. So all of these are here as intended. Now, if we open the project and create something like a material, we can also see how this will automatically pick that up and we can add that to our repository as well. So this is going to be nice and simple. It doesn't need to be even named properly because this is just a test. We'll save this and make sure this gets picked up. I'm going to go back to our desktop app and we can see as I click in here, we now have new material has been tracked as well. So as we now start going in and adding things to our project, we can see all of this is being tracked successfully. So the final thing is to get this pushed to the internet so that everything is then stored. So what we want to do is we need, you can see this says required here. We need just a description. Now for the first one, in a lot of repositories, you'll see this called init for initialize, so or initial. So we'll just say that this is the initial commit here. So we'll commit everything that we have in this change section. At the moment, we're just committing that to say that these have all been checked, they're working, they're ready and safe to go. We don't have that on the internet yet. We haven't pushed this to the actual repository. We then have these two options. Either one of these will do the same thing. We have push origin. So this is going to take that information and place it on the final repository branch. So like I said, either of those buttons will do the same thing. So just press one of those. And that is it. So we can now go to our history. We have all of our information stored here. So initially, the actual initial commit, I suppose, is the just git ignore file. So because it had that file that we told it to include, it created an initial commit to store that. And then our personal initial commit is this just here. So we have the folders and files that we've just created. Now, if you wanted, because of course this is a little bit untidy, we can remove the yt_git, go into the temp folder and pull this to the desktop. Of course, again, we'll need to close the engine if you had that open. So we'll try that again. And this will cause a problem in the Git application, which is why I wanted to show this here. So quite simply, we're going to locate this. And of course, it's now located here. So we're just going to double click onto the yt_git. As long as the folder that you've selected has the .git inside of it, you know you have the right one. And we can see we've got all of that information again. So it's now synced back up. One kind of extra step, but I think that makes the process a little bit easier just to kind of drag the files and so you know you've got them in the right place. With that done, we're going to go back to github.com just to check that everything is there as intended. So when you're on the web page, you're going to want to press F5 to refresh this, and we can see that 2 minutes ago, I've included the content folder and the U project. We don't have any of that saved or intermediate folders. We do have the content that we've created, that new material asset, so now anyone can pull this and see the information that we've provided. So hopefully that has been fairly simple for most people. Like I said, that is the harder way to do it, and that is still quite simple. Just a little extra step if you want to make it quite kind of tidy, I suppose, by replacing that temporary folder, having it in the location that you wanted because of that naming conflict issue. Now, for the next one, we're going to need to get rid of this project. I want it to be called the same thing. So this will be a good way for me to show you how to delete a repository as well. So if you ever create one and it's never going to be used again, you can go to Settings. We're going to scroll right down to the bottom, and we want this Delete the Repository option. This will give you a quick warning saying that you need to type in the name of the project to ensure this hasn't been an accident. Bad things will happen. You'll never be able to get this back. That is perfectly fine because we're going to recreate this in just a moment. So I'm just going to copy this. The easiest way is just to copy the entire thing, the name of the account and the project, understand the consequences and delete. Okay, so we now have no projects again. This is exactly what we want. And we're going to now do this what I would say is the easier, maybe not easier, but to me, this makes conceptually more sense, the kind of flow that we're processing this. So back on the desktop, we're going to go back into the yt_git. We want to make sure, we'll pretend this is a completely fresh project. So I'm going to get rid of the .git and the .git ignore. So we've not actually created a repository yet. We'll just pretend that. I'm going to go back into the desktop client as well. And now it's going to say that this has been lost again. So this time we're just going to remove it. And what we want to do now, using this second approach that you can take to create repositories, and I'm kind of emphasizing this because this is the way that I never see get shared, and I just find this so much easier. So rather than cloning something from the internet, we're just going to create a local version on our hard drive. So we're going to take the project we already have, and we're going to push that straight to the internet. Rather than pulling, updating, and then pushing back, we're just going to push in one go. So we're going to create a new repository on your hard drive. We're going to navigate to the desktop, and rather than temp, we're going to choose the yt_git, of course. In fact, we can skip that bit because if we put it on the desktop and just name this yt_git, we can choose to add a git ignore again. So we get the same options as we do online. We're going to scroll down and find our Unreal Engine git ignore. We don't need a license. We don't need a README. Don't really need a description. And if we create the repository, because we've done this on the local system, there's no issue of that project folder already existing. The .git folder is placed directly into the right location. The git ignore is placed there immediately as well. And if we click into this now, all of those files are already included in the initial commit that was made when we made that action. So the initial commit already includes our U project, the material that we've created, and all of the config files that we're going to need. So if you wanted, you could test this again. We could come back into the project just to make sure that this is synced in the right place. We can create another material, or this time let's go with a blueprint class. So we'll create a new blueprint class, doesn't matter of which type. We'll save that and just make sure again that we click in here. We can see one change has happened, and we can say that we've added blueprint. Preferably your comments here are going to be a little bit more useful to help people know what you've tracked, what you're doing, what bugs you may have fixed. And you can add a more in-depth description down here, but I think this will be fine for now. So we'll say that's perfectly fine. We'll commit this to main, and we're going to publish this the same way we did before. And again, this is now where we're actually going to publish this repository. So this was essentially our first step of the previous process. This is what's going to make this exist on our github.com account. So we'll keep the name to be the same. We'll make this a private project, and we'll publish to a repository. With that done, we can now make sure that's all gone through successfully. So we're going to go back to our browser again. We will want to refresh this. We can see at the moment we don't have any projects, but now we refresh this. It will find the information that we have just published through our application, and we can double check that this isn't just like a bug of the last one being left over. If we go into the content folder, we have the new blueprint and the new material. So this is definitely the most recent repository that we've created. So hopefully most of you agree with me that that is the, if not easier approach, it's definitely the one which makes a little bit more sense conceptually. The kind of process that you take seems to have a few less steps, and it's very much taking what you have on your system, directing the application to where you want the repository to be found, and then pushing that to your github.com account, and then everything is tracked the same way. With our repository set up, and hopefully you've chosen to follow along in the same order, so you have the local version pushed to the internet, because you may have noticed that if we go back to the root, there's one extra file here that we didn't get the other way, which is the Git attributes. For whatever reason, when you do it from the internet down to your local file, you don't get that created by default. It's something that we will need. If you don't have one, you can always just go to the add option file here, add something which doesn't have a name, and just give it the file type of .git attribute. So you can do that by creating a new file here, or of course you can do that through something like a text editor, but we will need this a little bit later. The main thing for the moment is we're going to go back to our desktop and our application, and we're going to start looking at the LFS, the large file storage. So this is going to help us manage those files which are generally, again, maybe not needed to be tracked in all projects, but some people do quite like to have things like the .psd or the .blend or .fbx folders and files in their root system so that everything associated with that project is easy to track. Sometimes it may not even just be a preference, you may need to have those bigger files in your project. So the way we're going to do this, we have to actually initialize this through some command prompts. These are going to be probably the hardest bits, and this is still going to be super simple, as you'll see when we go through the process. So because hopefully you already have that LFS installation done from earlier in the video, all we need to do is inside of the folder, so the root folder here, we're going to right click and we're going to select the git bash here. Now, the next few steps aren't magic. If you remember way back to the LFS webpage, there were those 3 steps of things that we need to type in somewhere. This is where we need to type in those things, and I will show you it's very, very simple to get this installed to your project. You need to do this once on a per project basis if you need the LFS process to that project. So the first thing we want to do is we're going to type git LFS install. Once you have that, of course, we're going to hit enter. We'll let that do its thing, and we can see it's updated here, and the Git LFS is initialized. So this has initialized it for the project. It hasn't really done anything yet. What we want to do is if we check the before and after of our .git attributes file, we can see nothing here has changed yet. Again, I'm going to open this in VS Code. It makes a pretty lightweight text editor. And we can see that nothing, this is exactly what it would have looked like before we had done that initialization. So you'll need this here if you're creating it manually. We can just have, there's a comment here and the text has been set to auto. So what we want to do is we'll keep this open somewhere else and we'll check this as we go along. So the next thing is going to be tracking the files through our LFS system. This is very simple. Again, it's just a simple command. We'll start with git LFS track. So that's the command. And then we want to tell it the thing we want to track. And pretty much like we've seen in the git ignore, and as we have here, the commands are essentially defined with this asterisk. So we're going to say, let's start with a blend file, something I use quite often. So we'll say asterisk.blend. If we hit enter again here, this will say that it's now tracking .blend file. So any .blend file that it finds within this project structure, it will track those, count it as an LFS file, and manage that accordingly. We can see as well automatically that this has updated. So this has been added in. And now if you wanted to not do it through the application here, this prompt, you could always quite simply copy your own things into the Git attributes. Of course, if you wanted to make sure it was all done successfully or the way as suggested, we'd add further things. So let's add a .fbx and a .psd just to get familiar with the process. And another shortcut here, we can just press up to retrieve the last thing that we've typed, get rid of the PSD, and now we'll add our FBX. And again, we have those all being added to our Git attributes. The LFS file system has been initialized to this project. And again, all of these will be tracked and managed as required. And the final thing then, we can save out of all of this. Now, this is also going to be a nice kind of example before we go too much further. We're going to take a look at collaboration in just a second. But if we close this file to begin with, and we can close our bash window, what I want to double check is that we can also revert the changes that we've made. If we haven't already pushed this to the origin, if we have, for instance, created a huge list of things that we don't want to go through one by one, or added some test logic to a project is the kind of usual situation or scenario, I suppose, and you realize that it's going to break something or it wasn't needed for the project. What we can do is, whilst this is still in the changes doc here, we can right click this and we can either ignore it so that we can maybe wait so it doesn't get added at the moment and we can retrieve that a little bit later, or we can just discard the changes entirely. So if we discard this, then discard the change, that will be removed. So now if we go back into the .git attributes file, we can see that all of the changes that we've just made through the git bash have been reversed. And if we publish the other changes that we did want to keep, then those will be there as well. You can do that on a per file basis. So I don't have a list here to show, but say you added like a bunch of materials and you only wanted the materials to be forgotten, you can discard those and move out, commit everything else ready for the push when that push is ready. So you can kind of pick and choose as well which files are going to be kept. If you've been working on it for a few days without pushing, you may not want everything. So you can always dock and commit separate things if you need to. So very flexible, just something to be aware of. And that's going to make things, again, much safer. So the idea is that you're never pushing bad code to a repository. You never want to push something potentially to a team which might break someone else's workflow, or that you're not 100% sure is going to stay in the project, for example. So the final thing, back in our browser, this time we're going to go to docs.github.com. Going through the user accounts options here, or just searching for something like inviting collaborators, this is going to be worth checking. This video should hopefully stay relevant for as long as possible, but this is one of those things that can change quite quickly, especially when they do big changes like allowing all repositories to be privated as well as public for free. So the two main differences here is if you have made your repository public, this is very, very simple to get other people working with you. If you remember that link that I showed you earlier to get the repository on your local system, you basically just need to either link someone to the repositories through the URL so that they can get it directly through GitHub and they can just find that themselves, or you can give them that HTTPS URL and they can download that through their application. So you can direct them to the beginning of this tutorial if they're not familiar with that process. So public collaborations are very simple. Private collaborations take a few extra steps. So one thing I always say as well, especially if you're just in like early trial or kind of throwaway projects, I tend to make those public anyway. Generally, people aren't going to do anything too stupid with it. And if you're not too precious about your code, it makes it very easy to get people to dive in, jump in, look at the code, maybe play around with the files with you. And it just saves everyone a little bit of time. Like I said, more useful perhaps if you know that you have a kind of throwaway or very temporary project or something you just want to share like open source or something. Now, if you have something which needs to be slightly more secure, then you're going to want to make this a private repository. You want to go through the GitHub account settings and the access management, and you'll be adding your collaborators this way. So I'm just going to fade on over back to the GitHub repository that we have on our main account. And when we're here, quite simply, we want to go to settings. I'm going to go to that manage access option. Remember, that's what we saw in the documentation. And we want to invite a collaborator. So only those with access can view the repository. So that's going to be the default. We can manage this to give them more or less authority in our repository. But the main thing here is that we're going to want to invite that collaborator. So you'll need to know their GitHub name or email. You can search for them. And if they exist on the website, then you should be able to find them. So for instance, I know that I'm signed in as my dev enabled account, but I also have a personal where I manage all of my personal projects, my Rugby Creates account. So I could add myself through another account to be a collaborator. I can add myself to this repository. And then if I sign back in to this account, I'll need to respond to say, yes, I'd like to join. And then this will show in my repository list. And I'm not going to show that because basically it's very much a repeat then of the beginning of this tutorial where you have that list. You can get the HTTPS link and everything. You pull that as you would usually, and you have that access. So that's really all it is to getting another person collaborating and inviting them to your project. Okay, so hopefully that has been a relatively pain-free way to get into the repository game. You have your first project set up in a couple of ways through GitHub. I've tried making it as flexible as possible, so you've got those different ways in which you can see the approach to getting things up there or pulling it directly from the internet, working with others and getting LFS installed. So I think that's pretty much the full package when it comes to getting an initial repository set up. Like I said, there are going to be links for everything in the description below. And of course, don't forget to check out Core. It's completely free to get started, to publish and play other games on the platform. Just visit coregames.com or click the link in the description. If you wanted to support the channel, just following the link below is going to be super useful. It will let the guys over at Manticore know where the traffic is coming from. And as it's a platform that I genuinely wanted to start using myself, I actually wanted to start a new playlist topic on this channel, more focused on game design, the mechanics, the theory behind it, which is something I've actually really interested in, but I just haven't had the chance to focus on outside of doing the more technical tutorials. And Core is actually something I was thinking of leveraging for that to get these really quick fire ideas going, even before I was contacted for this sponsorship. So it's just worked out really well. That's is something that I was going to be doing in the next few months on the channel anyway. And they've reached out and contacted me about the traffic jam, where you still have plenty of time to get involved and could potentially take home part of the large prize pool. It's a very simple platform to get used to. I have used it a few times already, just nothing worth kind of recording or doing any content on it yet, but it is something I wanted to leverage more going forward. So this has worked out to be perfect timing. And like I said, following that link in the description below, we'll just let them know that you've come from this video and that hopefully it's worth working with me and the channel in the future for this type of content.